This is the last video for Chapter 9. This is an important video because it deals with the fact that we're making a decision when we're doing hypothesis testing, and our decision isn't perfect. So this is to drive home the fact that the decision's not perfect. So here I've derived a little table here that I'm going to be filling in this video. So we have two situations. Either the null hypothesis is true or it's not true. And we have two decisions that we're going to make. Either we're going to reject the null hypothesis or we're not going to reject the null hypothesis. So let's consider the consequences of our decisions given the two different possible realities. So if the null hypothesis is true and we reject it, then we've made a mistake because we shouldn't have. So this type of mistake is called type 1 error. And type 1 error is actually what we're using when we use our cutoff value for rejecting the null hypothesis. And what do I mean by that? I'm going to go over here. When we draw our curve for rejecting the null hypothesis, we have our x bar or our p hat here. Let me call it p hat. Okay, and here is our hypothesized p, and here is our z. Okay. So when we say that we are going to reject for any z or p hat that is in this direction, we're going to reject if our p-value is less than 0.05, this area is less than 0.05. When we draw this curve, we're saying h0 is true. We're saying that this is the center of this normal curve, our sampling distribution for p hat, and that we are willing to reject the null hypothesis 5% of the time. So this 0.05 is also called the significance level. Okay, so alpha is the notation. Alpha equals the probability of type 1 error. In other words, alpha is the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when you should not. Okay, so alpha, the significance level, is the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when you shouldn't. Okay? Now continuing on, if h0 is true, if the null hypothesis is true and you don't reject it, you haven't made any mistake. So there's no mistake here. Now let's change our reality. Suppose instead h0 was false. And this is what people find confusing because they're saying, well, suppose it's true, suppose it's false. Which is it? The thing is we don't know. What we're doing is saying if we did know, what are the consequences of our decision? So if the null hypothesis were false and we rejected h0, we wouldn't be making a mistake. So no error here. On the other hand, if the null hypothesis is false and we do not reject h0, then we have made a mistake. And this is what we call type 2 error. And the probability of type 2 error we haven't run into yet, but it is, not surprisingly, called beta. So beta is the probability of type 2 error. Now, this might seem a little strange to you, but I'm going to rewrite this table in something that you will see is something that you are more used to and can swallow. And it's the same sort of thing that's going on here, except we're not going to be putting on any numbers in alpha or beta. And what is that? So the reality, okay, I'm going to use the U.S. legal system. In the U.S. legal system, our null hypothesis is that the defendant is innocent. So that's our h0. So the defendant is really innocent. And the alternative is that the defendant is guilty. So that is the reality that we don't know and that the prosecutor is trying to determine. Okay. Rejecting h0, in other words, is the equivalent of saying that the person is convicted. So the defendant is convicted. And not rejecting h0 is that you are acquitted. Okay. So you see, in this sense, I think most people have a good feeling about what it means to have type 1 and type 2 error. If the defendant is innocent and you convict him, then you have committed what we call type 1 error. So this is a false conviction. If the defendant is really innocent and you acquitted him, then you haven't made a mistake. If the defendant really is guilty and you convict him, you haven't made an error. If the defendant really is guilty and you acquit him, then you make what's our equivalent of type 2 error, and now you have a criminal that's running around on the streets that is likely to commit more crimes. So the type 1 error is convicting an innocent person, and the type 2 error is not convicting a guilty person. So I think this makes sense to most people. The homework problems that you have in this part of chapter 9, there's a story that goes along with what's your null hypothesis, okay, and whether and your decision. So if you do those stories making up this table, then you'll be able to understand which is the type 1 error, which is the type 2 error. The homework problems are along the lines of, suppose a drug works or it doesn't work. If a drug works and you say it works, doesn't work, etc. So the homework problems are giving you word problems, and you have to set up the equivalent of this table. So I hope this helps. If it doesn't, please let me know. Okay.